Joining me now, Richard Fisher. Dr. Fisher is a senior fellow at the International Assessment and Strategy Center. No, he's not that. What is he? He's not a doctor? I think he's a doctor. I'm going to anoint him doctor. Hey, if Dr. Bitkofer, who puts out fake polls, can be a doctor, Rick Fisher can be a doctor. Richard Fisher, Rick Fisher. You know what? I call you a doctor because every time I talk to you, you're so smart. I'm like, well, he's got to have like 5 PhDs in something. Rick Fisher, good to have you with us, sir.
Thank you, John.
I got your title right, though. Senior Fellow at International Assessment and Strategy Center. Didn't I get that right?
That's right, John. I just try to be a modest guy.
Me too, Doc. That's my middle name, just after Godzilla. Now, Doc, in all seriousness, so Hong Kong, did Beijing blink?
No, not really. It seems like they blinked, but in reality, the tide, it's really like a slow-motion tsunami tide of envelopment of Hong Kong continues. The ultimate Chinese goal is to basically eliminate Hong Kong as a financial and free, democratic, cultural point in China. The goal is to turn Hong Kong into a city no different from any other Chinese city like Shanghai or the nearby Shenzhen complex. The tactics that Beijing employs are really not something we should be focusing on. What we should be focusing on is the fact that Hong Kong has a democratic culture. It's not a democracy, but it's culturally democratic. And when China began to put the squeeze to tamp down on these freedoms that people take for granted in Hong Kong, they took to the streets by the millions. But that's not going to deter the communist dictators in Beijing. They have all kinds of means, digital dictatorship means, vast police databases. Everybody in Hong Kong who took to the streets has some kind of presence in a Chinese database. And the communist dictatorship has years and years and years to settle down, find you, and deal with you, change your mind, and if they can't change your mind, then they have more less pleasant options.
Which are?
Well, the options of Xinjiang. Xinjiang is now in the midst of a project to basically eliminate the Muslim faith, to eliminate a religion. How are they doing that? Well, they've dragooned about 1 million Han Chinese, ethnic Han Chinese civil servants to go be minders in the families of Xinjiang. You have a family, you have 3, 4, 5 kids because you're faithful Muslim. You now have to play host to a Han Chinese minder. Lord forbid that you do anything to that minder, because then the police will come and truly take you away. But that minder is there to train you, argue with you, tell you about the insufficiency of all of your upbringing, what your parents taught you, and if the minder isn't successful, well, there are what they call re-education camps, what the rest of the world calls concentration camps. You might go in, you might not come out.
Mm-hmm.
But if you do come out, well, you're a different person. You're very afraid. You're going to do what the Chinese state wants you to do. So that is another future that stands before the people of Hong Kong, as it does the people of Taiwan, potentially the people of Mongolia, people of South Korea, Japan, and other Chinese military targets that could unfold over the course of this century.
That's a very frightening scenario, Rick Fisher, that you've laid out. Very dark, but I guess reality is now setting in. So basically, on paper, in the media, it looks like Beijing backed down, but in reality, you're saying that they just have a long-term plan that is an inexorable march toward engulfing Hong Kong and eliminating their culture, as they did with Xinjiang.
As is underway in Xinjiang. Yeah, the Chinese are now investing in have a massive infrastructure investment program in the areas surrounding Hong Kong. What they want to do is create such an economic buzz just outside of Hong Kong that this draws the energy of Hong Kong and levels it out.
Interesting and frightening at the same time. So can we go back a little ways? The way you outline this, you're a scholar. You've studied this for a long time. Certainly many, many other people have also. So why would Margaret Thatcher have agreed to turning this over to the Chinese back in the day?
She basically, she certainly had a choice not to turn it over, but at the time, the early to mid 1980s, China was just emerging from the horrors of the Mao era.
Mm-hmm.
Deng Xiaoping was new on the scene and was traveling the globe in a remarkable display of deception. Within 2 years, Deng Xiaoping convinced the West that he was their friend, enough of a friend to help them defeat the Soviet Union. He launched a disastrous war against Vietnam, which convinced especially Washington of his sincerity. And by the early 1980s, the United States, Europe, Israel, other countries had opened up the gates of investment, technology transfer, and China has been growing hand over fist ever since. Those were heady times, and the West, Britain, were still very powerful in comparison to China's relative power at the time. And it's easy to see, I suppose, how a leader like Margaret Thatcher could have enough confidence in the long term in her discussions with Deng Xiaoping to at least accept that Hong Kong had a real chance of lasting through the promises that Beijing was making about a 50-year transition period and such. Of course, those promises broke down relatively quickly, but Margaret Thatcher had passed from the scene, and subsequent governments in London simply did not hold Beijing's feet to the fire, and thus today the people of Hong Kong are up against the wall and protesting in what could be the beginning of their final hurrah.
Because you feel that eventually that the crackdowns will start and the Chinese government is in this for the long haul. Nothing's got to get done Wednesday. They're very patient in executing their agenda, and they know that the West will be feckless in acting. Unlike what Reagan said when the Chinese gunboats were headed to Taiwan, and Reagan deployed the Navy, remember that? And said, you're going to go there over my dead body. And they didn't really trust Reagan. They didn't really know what he was going to do. So they backed off. I don't think there's a leader in the Chi-Com government right now that thinks the West would do anything. Agreed?
China remains deterred for now. As I look at their overall military modernization, their assessment of the balance of power, their assessment of what they can get away with. They may not do something as bold as try to invade and take over Taiwan until maybe the middle of the 2020s.
Mm-hmm.
It could come sooner. I think they have the capabilities to succeed today if they're willing to accept very large casualties, massive casualties. But today, at least, they're looking at Donald Trump. He's not going along with the previous playbook of continual, never-ending concessions, and he's also committed to rearming America.
Mm-hmm.
He took us out of the INF Treaty.
Mm-hmm.
Goodness.
Mm-hmm.
He may not even like the New START Treaty that covers ICBMs. Donald Trump might actually do something that truly deters the Chinese, like develop and deploy a couple of thousand non-nuclear ballistic and cruise missiles.
Mm-hmm.
That's what the Chinese really fear.
Mm-hmm. So they're going to wait him out, right?
Well, they definitely aren't going to be voting for him next year.
Right, but if they're playing the long game and Trump is an unpredictable actor in their minds, because if you play your strategy out, Rick Fisher, we're with Rick Fisher, senior fellow at the International Assessment and Strategy Center. So, Rick, if we play your strategy out, and the Chinese play they play the long hand in everything, they're simply going to wait and say, look, this guy's unpredictable, right? He's not following the playbook like all the other presidents. We already had Kamala Harris do a press conference and said, elect me, there'll be no tariffs, they'll be gone the next day. Biden said the same thing. So they're just going to wait it out, right? Because they don't really know what Trump is going to do if they try to move on Taiwan. They don't know what he's going to do. He's just too unpredictable. So they're going to wait him out till they get, a globalist president that goes back to the way of conceding, and they'll come up with some scheme or scam in Taiwan, just like Thatcher did in Hong Kong, and it'll look like a handshake, and then in due time they'll take that over as well.
Well, John, what you say is eminently reasonable. However, the Chinese have benchmarks they have to meet as well. The Chinese Communist Party has always been a project to stay 3 or 4 steps ahead of their executioners. And their executioners are, first, a population that could go bonkers on them, just like the people of Hong Kong are going bonkers. An economy that must continue to grow to ensure that the people of China don't go bonkers. And then they need to show that they can achieve things. They can get results. Although results for them means building the strongest military on earth, conquering democracies like Taiwan, proving to the people of China that they are a force that can deal with you very quickly if they have to. I mean, that they can intimidate everybody. When the people of China are less well off, even hungry, angry, and no longer afraid of the Chinese Communist Party, then that party is in big trouble.
So that's the real enemy, is the one billion people in China that they have to keep fed and working.
Yes.
Now, is President Trump's economic policies with China a threat to that, Richard Fisher?
Absolutely. President Trump and his good advisors like Peter Navarro have been working very hard to advance the simple concept that international rules that apply to the world should also apply to China.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, the Chinese Communist Party does not accept that any rules apply to it in any sphere.
Mm-hmm.
So we are trying to force the Chinese Communist Party to accept, no, you have to play by certain rules. If they do that, then they will be sacrificing some of their goals. One of the objectives of the Trump administration is to convince the Chinese to give up a program called Made in China 2025, which is essentially a vast investment program to make China the dominant manufacturing center of the world, meaning everything you want to buy eventually will have to be purchased from China or a Chinese-owned company.
Because they've captured the supply chain through dumping, through cheap labor, through product subsidization, through all the things that they've been allowed to do, which has crushed competitors in other countries that can't compete with that, which is exactly what the president's been saying for a very long time. So let me ask you this. I've got 2 minutes. Rick Fisher, if you were to go to the White House tomorrow and go to the Oval Office and sit down, and the president shut the door and said, Rick, tell me what your advice is on China right now, what would it be?
Number one, continue with your instincts to rebuild the American military, especially in Asia. Build the missiles, deploy the missiles. Your instincts are absolutely correct, and you should never waver from that. Secondly, we must secure Taiwan. Taiwan is a culturally Chinese enclave that has embraced completely a democratic culture. The rest of China doesn't stand a chance of becoming free if Taiwan is allowed to be consumed. So that simply cannot happen. And then third, yes, we need to tell our allies that they must spend more, but we must engage them more. And we must engage them in innovative ways. And we have to be thinking about the future, about space control, and also how to involve them in that quest.
Rick Fisher, I want to thank you. We're out of time. Great analysis. We've been chatting with Rick Fisher, a senior fellow at the International Assessment and Strategy Center and a long-term scholar and an expert, if you will, modest as he is, on the Far East and on Asia and Asia studies. Rick Fisher, thanks for being with us.
Thank
Great
you,
insight.
sir.
I'm going to pass it on to the powers to be.